Hey there, cats and kittens. All right, so we're going to try to pull this off today. What I'm doing is I'm going to demonstrate the two-note Opus. It's that new amp cab simulator that can also do acoustic guitar, apparently. Can it? We're going to find out. What I'll do at some point is give you a clip from my last video. I did one with the HX Stomp, then I tweaked the patch and did it in my HX Effects because you don't need an amp in HX Effects, right? It's not an amp simulator, but you can use IRs. So it's the same thing with this two-note Opus. They have their own IRs that come with it, which are quite good, but we'll get to that. You can also import your own. That's somewhat sketchier, and I'll explain later, I hope, if I remember. Not that you can't do it, but I think that the ones in there sound better than anything you could import, and that has to do with latency, length, sample rate, etc., 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 you know, all the variables. So what I've done is I've created a preset, and it was based off their Nashville 45 preset, which is a J45 IR. Nashville 45 Studio IR is specifically the one I'm using, and you can see it on the screen. If there's any glare, I apologize. I tried to remove as much of it as possible. I did a lot of dancing with the lights to get it this way, but I think it should be okay. So, as you'll see on the screen, there is this app. And this app is pretty wonderful. I have to say, they did an amazing job with the app. So you can do two IRs, or you could do one, because it's a mono unit essentially, but you can combine two IRs to that mono output. The one thing I would say about that is just be careful checking your phase. For me, it worked out that it was fine with it the way it is, but I did flip back several times to check it. The other thing I would suggest, and this is what I've done with this patch, is the IRA is at 0, right? You know, like, you know, normal 0 level. But IRB, which is a different acoustic IR, it is the Nashville 200, a J200, and it's Nashville 202. That one's mixed down -12, because to me, that's where it sounded best. Now, I'm going to play you these without any compression. I do think that it sounds to me like there's some compression happening in here, whether it was added to the IRs or it's built in, because it's not something you can adjust in the app or the unit itself. So I just want to say that up front, but I will add mine later, because I think that the Source Audio Atlas compressor is amazing for acoustic guitar, especially because it's got two EQs that you could use either pre or post, one pre, one post, or both post. I use it both post, which then goes into the Opus and greatly enhances the sound you're going to get out of this. I'm using the same guitar I used for the Line 6 HX Effects. It's a Larrivee L-03. I'm using the Mahogany one. I also have a rosewood with spruce top, but this is the Mahogany, and it sounds like this, straight through, no compression, and I will show you a couple of tweaks besides the compressor to make this sound better. Now, as you can see on the screen, one thing I will recommend is, again, you don't need to use two IRs. For some of you, maybe many of you, one will be just fine, because when I had one going, it was fine, but I just needed a little more, I don't know, a little more sparkle. And that's where the Opus can fall short a little bit unless you're using two, because while it has an EQ section, an enhance section, and a reverb section, the EQ, so this particular patch, when you all pull it up, it's going to give you the standard guitar EQ, which is 5 bands, but you know, and it's also, you're going to notice that they're jacked, you know, except for the low end, which they've cut, which was at 120 hertz. But all the other ones were like, you know, +6 at 2K and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, wow, that's really weird. And it wasn't until I added a compressor and a compressor that could do EQ that I understood that that's what it needs to actually sound good. So I'm gonna put my headphones on. That sounds pretty good, right? Now, one of the things I'm doing is using the power amp, not the preamp. If you put the preamp on, it's really gonna sound ampy. That's the difference when you're doing acoustic IRs versus the amp section. The amp section is excellent. I created a couple of patches there. We won't talk about them today, maybe some other time, but I'm very, very happy with that. So I'm not using the preamp section, as you can see on the screen. However, I am using the power amp, because I thought it gave it some body and made it come alive. I'm going to turn the power amp off now, and this is without it. It's fine, it's pretty good. Maybe some of you will like that. But putting it back on and adjusting the contour and the depth to my liking and taking the volume down a little bit, I suppose what we're doing is biasing the tubes, the imaginary tubes, and contouring it a little bit. And again, this is with. And this is without. Now with again. Maybe a little less high end, but a lot more body. And I went with the body. I'm a body man. And so let's talk about the EQ. This is with the EQ. This is without any EQ whatsoever. A little flat, right? And where I'm at with the EQ is I'm boosting a little bit at 118 hertz because this is it's a low shelf. It's not a peak or bell EQ there. If it was a peak or bell, I'd probably do the same. I wouldn't need to boost it that much. But I'm boosting it because I thought I was not getting That bottom, I needed that. But to compensate for it not being too boomy, I'm high passing it at 96 hertz, which, you know, you would have to high pass an acoustic guitar anyway. You know, they can get a little boomy. In fact, a lot of DIs have them built in. The next EQ is 335 hertz, and that is a bell-shaped cut or boost, and I am cutting 9 dB, a lot. Yeah, a lot at 335. It was just chunky and funky as all get out. Then the next peak is at 831 hertz. I had to really work to dial that in where, for this guitar, where it best suited. And I'm boosting 7 dB. 7 dB at 831 hertz. And this brings me back to what the stock patch was before I even got to it. Had like massive 9 dB boosts on some of these. Like it was 750 hertz instead of 831. Like I said, 831 worked best for this guitar, but it was 750 boosted like 7 to 9 dB. And then the next one is 2210, and I think it was around 22 or 2300, and it was boosted like 9 dB. I'm boosting it 5 dB. And then I've got a high shelf at 6160 kilohertz, or 6.16 kilohertz, I guess 6160 hertz. And I've got a low shelf at 1103. 11,031 hertz, or 11.03 K. I've got a high shelf. So that's what's giving us. Now, I don't want it sparklier than that. You might. When I'm playing live, if it's too tinny or sparkly, it distracts me. So that's just me. And then it's got this thing called the enhancer. Now let's play it a little without the enhancer. Perfectly fine. You turn the enhancer on. And what this does, it's probably more intended for electric guitar. However, it's got body, thickness, and brilliance, as you can see on the screen. The brilliance you probably can think of as presence. Thickness is thickness. It's like a low-mid thickness. And body is like an overall woofiness. I don't know, probably between 60 hertz and 180 hertz. So you don't need those in massively. As you can see, I've got them. Let me see what my settings are. The body, 17%. The thickness, 7. The brilliance, 7. And I spent a lot of time tweaking those settings to dial them in right. Plus, you've got a dry-wet knob. And I found, for me, the dry-wet at 44% really did it. So that's where you're getting. So for my patch, for this setting, it was a combination of the EQ, a little bit of the enhancer with the dry-wet blend, and using the power amp, and then having the second IR. Now let me bypass the second IR so you can hear it. So this is with. Now without. And you can hear that it loses a lot of detail. So in this case, putting in that second IR and finding the right second IR for you, if you choose to do so, is the key. in what that second IR is bringing to your particular guitar, and then blending it with the first one. For me, the Nashville J200 2 down 12 dB to the J45 really did it for me. And I really think that's a great sound. Now, it sounds to me, to my pretty educated ears, that there's a little compression going on there, but it's, like I said, it's not one of the settings. However, I like that sound. I think that's a pretty... That would be a fine singer-songwriter guitar sound. You also, as you can see on the screen, get reverb. So I chose a studio room, and I'm using it extremely subtly, because what I found is the more I brought, and I went back and forth between all of them, the ambient setting will give you more spatial stuff, and it's cool. But for me, if I'm getting up and singing in front of an audience, I don't want it to be too distracting. And what I found with the two studio room presets that they have, if you brought in too much of the dry wet, too much of the mix, it made the sound too spanky for me. Again, I don't like a really bright acoustic sound. I want detail, I want nuance, I want definition, but I don't want spanky. So if I turn the reverb off, you're not even going to notice that much. On. It just fills it out a little bit and gives it some dimension. But more than that, I felt it got too bright. So again, my preference doesn't have to be yours. Now, how did I make this better for me? I'm going to show you a couple things. This Source Audio Atlas compressor is freaking phenomenal, because you can have one compressor, you can have two compressors, you can blend them in series and parallel. And as I mentioned before, it's got two EQs that you can do the same with. So this is without. Now with. A little more definition and a little more like thunkiness, where you feel like it's snappy. It's snappy. And that's why I didn't want my patch to be too spiky, because I knew I could get it from the compressor and the EQs in this unbelievable Source Audio. It's got that snap, but it's not just the compressing. My compressor, I think I've got it set to 2.35 to 1, and I'm not even using a full 100% blend. I'm using like probably about a 55% blend, but adding that with the extra post compression EQs. I mean, now without, with. Sounds more like an acoustic guitar. It just brings it alive. Now, one more thing, I highly recommend checking out that source audio. I mean, oh my God. I've got 3 different presets that I can use, and I can switch now between any guitar I have based on those 3 presets, because each guitar has its own EQ, so I don't have to change anything in the Opus, but I have boom, 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 3 presets on the front of the source audio with 3 different EQ settings. Amazing, and I can even use it for electric. And this first one is a VCA compressor. The second I have is a Opto, like an LA2A. And then the third is for electric guitar, and that's a FET. So, beautiful. Amazing. One more thing I did, and I found this completely by accident, and this will kind of wrap this all up for us, is I bought this Sabatius Funky Vibe Fillmore East vibe machine thing, right? A vibe. And it was for electric guitar. But I wanted to make sure it worked when I bought it, right? You got to test your gear when you get it. So I plugged it in. It was awesome, awesome. And I use Vibe with acoustic, but this one is far too rich and thick to use with acoustic guitar. Plus, for you acoustic guitar players, you know this, some effects are too, like they're not tuned for acoustic, right? They're either too lo-fi or sometimes too hi-fi, and they're not pitched, for lack of a better term, to an acoustic guitar. So the acoustic guitar is too hi-fi and too transient for that particular piece of gear. It's just the truth. It's not always, but you'll find certain pedals do not respond to acoustic guitar. And that was the fact with this one. However, it has a cancel function. And the cancel function means that even while the pedal is bypassed, the preamp is on. And I was like, oh, let's see what that sounds like with acoustic guitar. So this is without. With. Without. With. Listen, it's a preamp, and a preamp will change the EQ curve of your signal. And this one does it in a pleasant, gives it a little bit more body, rolls off a little bottom, but doesn't cut the bottom. And it just kind of makes it wider is how now you don't need it. But I have another Vibe that I use that has a cancel function in it. It's half the size of this. It's, a double pedal, a footprint and a half size. And that is going on my pedal board, not just for the cancel function, but because I use a Vibe. I also use chorus, I use delay, I use an infinite sustainer. And that's the other beauty. The last thing I'll say about the 2-note Opus is what the 2-note Opus is going to allow me to do, and I think this is the real attraction for all of you, is I can put it on my pedal board, it's small, and then have all of the pedals that I use normally for acoustic and electric, maybe with the option of swapping out one or two for electric or lap steel, because I play a lot of lap steel, in those same positions. And that's all you need for a gig, right? Like, I don't even need to swap out pedals for a gig. I could get by on a gig with the same pedals I use on my acoustic pedal board, plus maybe adding one, like a wah or something, off the board for my lap steel or electric, and that's all you need. You have your acoustic preset. I created a preset for my acoustic Weissenborn lap slide. I created a preset for my lap steel guitar, and I created a preset for electric 6-string guitar. And you've got it all in that box that'll fit on a pedal board. You run your pedals before it. You only maybe have to change 2 pedals. And like I said, for me, I won't change them on the board because that would be silly in the middle of a gig. I would just run them before the board if I was using electric or lap steel. And you've got a really compact, I mean, I'm talking like, 20 by 7 is the board I'm going to be taking out to play gigs. And you won't be shorting yourself. You won't be cutting any corners. You'll have it all there. And that's the real attraction to the Opus. I think it's super hi-fi. I definitely put it through its paces. I bought it from Sweetwater, by the way. This isn't a sponsored thing. And I'm keeping it. I'm keeping it. I think just for the mere fact that, like, for instance, I like my HX effects, and I'll put a clip here right now of just a short clip of what the HX effects with my previously favored IR sounded like, so you can hear that, but I couldn't run an amp, right? I needed to run to a real amp. This, I can do it all in one compact board. So let me show you that real quick clip, just a little bit, of the HX effects, and then I'll link to my HX Stomp video and the full video with the HX effects. But I think overall, this is probably the better solution, unless you already have an HX Stomp and an HX effects, and then don't spend any more money. But for me, this was a really good purchase, and I'm glad I made it. I will be keeping it. They've already updated the firmware once, and I've only had it for 4 days. That was really cool. One last thing I should say about the IRs. So I imported my favorite tried and true J45 IR, which I gave to all of you for free in the link to my HX effects and HX Stomp acoustic preset videos. It sounded like crap, partially because these IRs are 40 millisecond IRs, and they did a really good job with these, making them sound fantastic. And when I imported my J45 IR, it was 100 milliseconds, big difference, and it sounded like crap compared to theirs. So if you're gonna use your own, be judicious and be cautious about what you choose and why, because theirs are fine and you probably don't need it. And the different timing differences and whatever else they've done to tweak them, it made a big difference to me. So anyway, sorry if that was long-winded, but check out this HX effects clip, and thank you for watching. And if you want me to do more of these, let me know. I'd be happy to. All right, peace.